The smell of pot roast and rosemary hit me the moment I turned onto my parents' street. My mom always cooked like she was feeding a small army, even when it was just the four of us. That night, it was more than four. That night, my sister was coming home. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. She'd been stationed in Germany, then briefly in South Korea. And before that, there were months where her name on my phone felt like a lifeline I wasn't sure I deserved to reach for. We had history the way sisters do, not the ugly kind, just the quiet, complicated kind that builds up over years of being too similar and too far apart at the same time. My husband pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. He sat there for a second before he opened the door, the way he does sometimes when he's thinking through something he hasn't decided to say yet. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired from the drive." I believed him. I always believed him because he'd never given me a reason not to. His name is Ben. He works for the federal government, has for almost 9 years. I knew when we started dating that his job wasn't something he could talk about freely, and over time I stopped needing him to. You learn to read a person in other ways, the set of his shoulders, the way he goes quiet at certain moments, the way he watches a room when he thinks no one's watching him. Inside, my mom had pushed both leaf extensions into the dining table. There were candles. She'd ironed the good tablecloth, the ivory one with the small embroidered flowers at the corners that she only brings out for Easter and Thanksgiving. And moments she decides deserve the same weight. My dad was standing by the record player in the living room, pretending to pick out an album, but really just waiting for the door to open. When it did, my sister walked in. Her name is Fiona. She's 3 years older than me, 34 to my 31, and she has always been the kind of person who enters a room like she already belongs in it. She was in her dress uniform, Army 8 years, and she looked the way she always looked in it, certain. Grounded, like someone who had gone somewhere hard and come back knowing exactly who she was. My dad made a sound I'd never heard him make before. Not a word, just a sound. He crossed the room and hugged her, and I watched my mom press her fingers to her mouth the way she does when she's trying not to cry at something beautiful. I hugged Fiona too. She smelled like the inside of an airplane and something floral, probably the hand lotion she keeps in her carry-on. She squeezed me hard. "You look good," she said into my shoulder. "You look like a poster," I told her, and she laughed. We all sat down to dinner. My mom had made the pot roast, the rosemary potatoes, green beans with the little onions that Fiona and I used to pick out as kids, and now both eat without thinking. There was a salad no one touched and 2 bottles of wine that disappeared faster than anyone acknowledged. Fiona told stories. She was good at it. She always had been. She talked about her unit, about a guy in her platoon who had tried to befriend a stray cat near the base and ended up getting scratched so badly he needed a tetanus shot. She talked about a weekend in Italy, a day she'd spent in Rome between assignments, standing in front of the Pantheon with a $4 espresso and feeling, for the first time in years, completely still. My parents listened to her the way they always had, like she was reporting back from somewhere they'd always wanted to go and would never quite reach. I watched Ben. He was smiling, laughing at the right moments, refilling my mom's wine without being asked, which she loved because she never asks. He was doing everything right. But somewhere around the second hour of dinner, I noticed he'd gone quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. He wasn't watching Fiona with warmth. He was watching her with attention. There's a difference, and I had been married to him long enough to know it. I thought I was imagining it. Fiona had started talking about her deployment to Kuwait, the one 2 years ago that had kept her from my wedding, though she'd never framed it that way, and I'd never let myself frame it that way either. She described the heat, the particular quality of light in the morning, the sand that found its way into everything. My dad leaned forward. "Were you near Arifjan?" he asked. He'd done a brief consulting stint in the region years ago and always perked up at geographic specifics. "Not far," Fiona said. "We rotated through a few posts, mostly logistic support." Ben reached for his water glass, and then, without looking at me, under the sound of my dad's follow-up question about regional infrastructure, he leaned just slightly in my direction and said, very quietly, "Her deployment timeline doesn't match her rank." I turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his plate, cutting a piece of potato with the focused patience of someone who had not just said what he'd said. I set down my fork. I didn't say anything. Not then. My dad was still talking. My mom was laughing at something Fiona said, and the candles were flickering, the way candles do when someone opens a door in another part of the house, which my brother-in-law had just done, my oldest sister's husband, coming in from putting their kids to sleep in the back bedroom. I picked my fork back up. I asked Fiona a question about Rome. She answered it with her eyes lit up and her hands moving. I smiled at all the right moments, but Ben's words had settled somewhere behind my sternum and they weren't moving. We stayed until almost 10. My mom sent us home with pot roast in a container she will never ask to have returned. On the drive back, Ben had the radio on low, some jazz station he likes that I've grown to like too, the way you grow into the things that belong to someone you love. I waited until we were home, until I'd washed my face and changed into the old college sweatshirt I sleep in, and was sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands in my lap. "What did you mean?" I asked. "About her timeline." He was quiet for a moment. He'd been expecting the question. I could tell by the way he didn't look surprised by it. "I'm probably wrong," he said. "Ben." He sat down next to me, the deployment she described. "Kuwait, that time frame, the rotation she mentioned, it doesn't line up with the rank she's currently holding. The progression is off. Either she was promoted unusually fast, which does happen, or some of the timeline is." He paused. "Compressed, compressed," I repeated. "I don't want to make assumptions," he said. "I could be missing context, but you're not usually missing context." He didn't answer that. I lay down, stared at the ceiling. The ceiling fan made its slow circles in the dark. "She was at my parents' house in a dress uniform," I said finally. "She has medals. She has medals. She has insignia. She told us about her unit, her rotations, I stopped. She wouldn't lie about that. She wouldn't lie to Mom and Dad about something like that. That's not." I pressed my hand flat against my sternum. "That's not who she is." "I know," Ben said. "Then why did you say it?" "Because I thought you'd want to know what I noticed." He was right. That was the thing about Ben. He was almost always right about what I wanted, even when what I wanted was inconvenient. I didn't sleep well. I lay there listening to him breathe, steady and even, long after he'd fallen asleep. And I ran Fiona's stories back through my head like I was looking for the seam in a piece of fabric. The way you run your thumb along the hem, feeling for where it doesn't quite hold. I called her 2 days later. I hadn't planned to do it so soon. I thought I'd wait, let it settle, maybe talk myself out of it. But I was driving back from a grocery run and her name was right there in my recent calls, and my thumb moved before the rest of me had agreed. "Hey," she said. "What's up, hey?" I signaled for a turn I didn't need to make, just to buy time. "I was thinking about something you said at dinner." "Which part?" "Kuwait," I said. "The timeline. When you were stationed there." A pause, just a beat, small enough that if I hadn't been listening for it, I might have missed it. "What about it?" "I was just doing the math," I said, trying to keep my voice easy. "You were there for 8 months, you said. But that would have been right when you were coming up on your promotion board. I didn't realize you had time for both." Silence. Not the comfortable silence of someone thinking. A different kind. "Fiona, where is this coming from?" Her voice had shifted, just slightly. Not cold, but careful. "I'm just asking. It's coming from Ben, isn't it?" I didn't answer. "Of course it is," she said, and there was something in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly, but the thing that lives right next to it. "He's been doing his federal government thing and he flagged something and now you're calling me." "I'm calling because I love you," I said, "and because you're my sister. And because if something isn't right, I would rather hear it from you than find it somewhere else." She went quiet again. "Fiona, please." When she spoke, her voice was different. The shape of it had changed, like she put something down that she'd been carrying for a while and was just now feeling how heavy it had been. "Can you come over?" she asked. She was staying at a short-term rental across town, a small 2-bedroom she'd said was temporary while she figured out her next assignment. I drove over that afternoon. She opened the door in jeans and a sweatshirt, no uniform, and she looked smaller without it. Not diminished, just herself. Just Fiona. We sat at her small kitchen table with 2 months of coffee she made too strong, the way she always does, and she looked out the window for a long time before she looked at me. "How much do you think he knows?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Tell me what there is to know." She wrapped both hands around her mug. Fiona had enlisted at 22, the way she'd always planned. Did 2 years honorably, and then she used the word incident at first, then caught herself and used the real word. There was a disciplinary situation involving a superior officer, a complaint she filed that was not handled the way it should have been, and a decision she made in the fallout that she has never fully forgiven herself for. She didn't re-enlist. She was given an other than honorable discharge. Not dishonorable, but not the clean exit she'd always imagined. She moved back home for a year, got quiet about where she'd been, started building a story around the fragments of truth she still had. The 2 years she'd actually served, the deployments that had actually happened, the medals she'd legitimately earned before everything came apart. And then because she's Fiona and she's always been good at committing to a thing, she kept going, kept adding to the story. Found the vocabulary, the references, the texture of a longer service record. By the time our family started asking, the answer was already there, polished and ready. 8 years of a life that was partly real and partly built. I sat with that for a long time. "The uniform," I said. "It's real. Everything on it that I wore that night I earned." She looked at me steadily. "I want you to know that. The medals are real. The rank on it's complicated. But I didn't buy something fake from a costume shop. It's not like that." "But the rank," I said. She looked down at her mug. "I never corrected what people assumed." "That's not the same as correcting it." "No," she said. "It's not." I thought about my dad making that sound when she walked in. My mom pressing her fingers to her mouth. The way the table had glowed that night was something that felt like pride, and maybe was built on something that wasn't solid. I thought about Ben saying her timeline doesn't match her rank in the same quiet voice he uses to tell me there's a storm coming, or that my car needs an oil change. Just information. "Here is something true that you should know." "What happens now?" Fiona asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Are you going to tell them?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, at my sister, who I had spent 31 years knowing and apparently not knowing and still knowing all at once, and I didn't have an easy answer. "I think the question," I said slowly, "is whether you're going to." I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while. Ben's car was there. The kitchen light was on. Through the window I could see him moving around, probably making the dinner he always insists on cooking on Thursdays, the one where he uses the cast iron pan and the whole house smells like garlic. I thought about what it means to love someone and lie to them. I thought about the difference between the lie you tell to protect yourself and the lie you tell to give someone else something they need. And I thought about how those two things can look identical from the outside and feel completely different from the inside. I thought about my parents. My dad and the sound he made, my mom's fingers at her mouth. I went inside. Ben was at the stove. He turned and looked at me the way he does when he already knows something went sideways. "She told me," I said. He turned back to the stove, moved the pan. "How much?" he asked. "Enough." He nodded. Didn't say anything else for a moment. "Then, are you okay?" I sat down at the kitchen counter. "I don't know yet." We ate dinner. Ben made something with chicken thighs and preserved lemon that was genuinely excellent, the way it always is, and we didn't talk about Fiona for most of it. We talked about the neighbor's new dog, a work thing I was dealing with, a trip we've been loosely planning to the Pacific Northwest that keeps getting loosely deferred. After, when the dishes were in the rack and the kitchen light was low, I said, "She has to tell them." "Yeah," he said. "She has to tell them." "Yeah," he said. "And I think she knows that." "What did she say when you told her that?" "She didn't disagree." He nodded. "She was scared," I said. "Not of what they'd think about her service record. More scared of," I stopped, "of what it would do to them. To my dad especially. He's so proud of her. Has been her whole life. And not just of the military thing, but the military thing became like this concentrated version of all of it." Ben was quiet. "I keep thinking about all the Thanksgivings," I said. All the time she came home and we all sat around a table and listened to her stories, and I thought, she is the most remarkable person. And she is. I pressed my palm flat on the counter. She is remarkable. And she also built something that wasn't real, and both of those things are true at the same time, and I don't entirely know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, Ben said. I know. But you also know what needs to happen. I know that too. It took Fiona 3 weeks. 3 weeks of phone calls between us that sometimes lasted an hour, where she'd work up to the edge of something and then step back, and I'd let her because I know my sister and I know you can't push her toward a hard thing. You can only stand somewhere near it and wait. She told our parents on a Sunday afternoon in March. She called me beforehand. Her voice was steady in the way voices get when someone has decided that being steady is the only option left. I'm doing it today, she said. Okay, I said. Do you want me there? A pause. No, I think I need to do this one on my own. Okay, if it goes badly, call me, I said. Immediately. She did call me. About 2 hours later, and it had gone, not badly exactly, but not cleanly either. My dad had gone silent for a very long time. My mom had cried, which Fiona said was the hardest part. Not angry crying, just the kind that comes when something you believe turns out to have different edges than you thought. But then, and this is the part that undid me a little, sitting alone in my living room listening to my sister's voice, my dad had said, "You served." That part was real. We start from there, and my mom had said, "I'm not glad you lied, but I am glad you're here, and that hasn't changed." Fiona's voice on the phone was different after she told me that. Lighter, maybe, is the wrong word. More like something had gone out of her that had been burning for a long time and had cost more than she'd been willing to admit. They want to see me next Sunday, she said. Dinner. Good, I said. Ben can come. I smiled at the wall. He'll be happy to hear that. There was a long pause on the line. I've been carrying that for 6 years, she said. It wasn't quite an apology and it wasn't quite an explanation. It was just a fact, offered plainly, the way people sometimes offer facts when they've finally stopped being afraid of them. I know, I said. I don't expect everyone to just, Fiona. They love you. I love you. That's not the part that was ever in question. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you for not going around me, she said. You could have told them. It would have been easier. It wouldn't have been easier, I said. And it wasn't mine to tell. Ben and I drove to my parents' house the following Sunday. My mom made pot roast again. I don't think she even realized she'd made the same thing, or maybe she did and it was intentional. A kind of reset, a way of saying we are starting this again from a place that is warm and smells like rosemary. Fiona was already there when we arrived. She was in jeans and a light jacket, no uniform. She was helping my mom set the table, folding cloth napkins with the focused precision she brings to everything. And when she looked up and saw me in the doorway, she gave me a look that was half gratitude and half something I can't quite name. Recognition, maybe. Of being known and still being let in. We sat down to dinner. My dad poured wine. He made a small toast. Nothing elaborate, just glad you're home. Which he said looking at Fiona and meant, I think, in a way that had nothing to do with geography. It wasn't perfect. There were long pauses. There were moments where the table felt like it was still working out what it was, post-revelation. But there was also laughter eventually. My brother-in-law said something that made Fiona nearly choke on her green beans, and the sound of her laughing at the table, really laughing, seemed to give everyone permission to exhale. On the drive home, Ben had the jazz station on again. After a while, he said, Your dad. I know, I said. The toast. I know. We drove in comfortable quiet for a while. The highway was nearly empty, late enough that the Friday night traffic had cleared, and it was just the dark and the road and the low sound of a trumpet doing something complicated and true. You handled it well, he said finally. The whole thing? I almost didn't call her, I said. I almost just let it go. I know. He glanced over. I'm glad you didn't. Because of the lie. Because of her, he said. She'd been carrying it alone for a long time. That's a heavy thing. I looked out at the passing dark, the first night, the dinner, the candles, the uniform. The pride on my parents' faces felt far away and not far away at all. Like something you can hold in your hands and know exactly what it is, even as you're still figuring out how to put it down. I thought about what it means to know a person. Not the version they present at the table, but the full thing. The thing underneath, with its wrong turns and its careful constructions and its 6-year-long ache that finally, on a Sunday in March, got to put itself down. I thought about my dad. You served. That part was real. We start from there. And I thought about how strange and good it is, sometimes, that the people who love you most are not the ones who most need you to be perfect. They're the ones who are still sitting at the table when you finally stop pretending that you are. I used to think that the people who lie to the ones they love most are just selfish, that it was always about protecting yourself at someone else's expense. I think I believed that because it was simpler, and simpler is easier to be angry at. But watching Fiona sit across from me at that small kitchen table, both hands around a mug of too-strong coffee, I understood something I hadn't before. The lie she carried wasn't built in a day. It started as one omission, one thing she didn't correct when someone assumed, and then it grew the way things grow when you're too tired and too ashamed to stop them. Not because she didn't love us, but because she loved us so much that she couldn't bear to be less in our eyes than she already felt in her own. That doesn't make it right. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. What she did caused real harm to my parents, who built years of pride on something that was only partly true, and to herself, because there is a cost to performing a version of yourself that doesn't fully exist. You pay it quietly in the middle of the night, in the way you hold yourself at dinner tables. Fiona paid it for 6 years. You could see it in the way she exhaled when she finally told me, like something that had been burning a long time had just run out of fuel. What I keep coming back to is this: the truth didn't destroy our family. I think somewhere in the back of my mind I was afraid it would. That my dad's pride was so tied to the story that losing the story would mean losing something irreplaceable. But that's not what happened. My dad said you served. That part was real. We start from there. And he meant it. Not because he was okay with the lie, but because he understood that his daughter was more than the worst thing she'd done to protect herself. That's what I've been sitting with. The idea that loving someone well doesn't mean needing them to be perfect. It means being willing to look at the full thing, the real thing, and stay. Ben saw it first. He always sees things first, quietly, without making it about himself. He didn't go around me. He didn't call my parents. He told me because he thought I'd want to know, and then he let me decide what to do with it. That kind of restraint is its own form of respect. He trusted me to handle it. And I almost let the whole thing go. Told myself I'd misunderstood, chose the easier version of that night. I'm glad I didn't. There's something I think about now when I consider what it took for Fiona to finally sit across from our parents and say the true thing. It wasn't courage in the dramatic sense. It was more like exhaustion that finally became honesty. She'd spent so long managing the story that she'd run out of the energy to keep it standing. And when it came down, what was underneath wasn't ruin. It was just her. Just Fiona. Complicated and real and still. Somehow, the person my dad crossed a room to hug. I think that's the thing worth holding on to. Not that honesty is always easy, or that families always survive the hard truths, but that the ones who love you most are often more capable of holding the real you than you've allowed yourself to believe. The wall you build to protect them from the truths is sometimes the same wall that keeps them from being able to reach you. Fiona is coming to dinner next Sunday. My mom is making pot roast again. The table will be full and imperfect and true, and I think that's enough. I think that's more than enough.